Let's move on now. And the dream of a home in the country is increasingly unaffordable.
Rural house prices are rising twice as fast as urban areas. Hotspots in Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire and Lancashire are partly driving the rise.
Well, prices rose 14.2% in countryside locations. That compares to under 7% in cities. This is according to figures produced by the Hamptons Estate Agency and published in The Guardian. COVID has seen rocketing interest in living beyond what would once have been seen as the commuter belt.
Working from home has made hundreds of thousands of homeowners reconsider where they want to live, with many choosing to swap smaller urban homes for a space in the garden and a countryside. I mean, I totally understand why people are moving to the countryside. I mean, if you even just look at the pandemic, London's been decimated. All of the vibrancy, all of the excitement, all of those things about London essentially has been hollowed out. Obviously, we hope it's going to bounce back. But I think that, we've had a slower pace of life. We've had a calmer pace of life. Maybe people are thinking, actually, this is what I want for the long term, a better work-life balance, much more nature, much more space. I think it's great that people are moving to the countryside, but not so great if it's driving up house prices and keeping young people out of the housing ladder.
We've reflected at length, haven't we, on the by-election that the Tories lost last week in Buckinghamshire, and one of the reasons that was cited, not just HS2, but this idea that planning laws could be relaxed to see large parts of what was hitherto a fairly rural place concreted over. There is a danger, is there not, maybe over decades, that in pursuing a certain type of dream, you actually kill the thing you're seeking to be part of. People who move to the countryside, does the countryside have recognisable values which are rural? And if you just import lots and lots of people from the cities, do they just bring their urban values with them? I mean, it's not just about the garden, the land, the views, the hedgerows, the nice combine harvesters in the fields that give you a nice view. Rural Britain, in the eyes of many people, has a certain set of values, and those values are diluted by people moving in with urban values. What are the values of rural Britain? A certain degree of self-reliance, a certain attachment to history and tradition. These are all sounding fairly conservative values at this stage. But maybe that's what's happened in Buckinghamshire. I mean, if that by-election told you anything, it's that, what was a safe Tory seat is no longer any such thing, because actually it's full of people with sort of, quote, anywhere values, graduate values, dislocated from a locality.
Yeah, no, I think that is a compelling argument. I think that, I'm definitely someone that does believe in the preservation of many of those values that have been denigrated in modern society: continuity, tradition, as you mentioned, self-reliance. But I think also if people want to move to those places, it's very difficult to stop them. But I think if you're moving to a place like that, I presume that to some extent you are buying into the ethos, because you're going to have a long commute if you're living in London.
And yet you still get these stories of people who, they move into the village and they object to the church bells tolling through the night. I mean, there was a story last week in the papers about some people who moved into a village in Devon and said, we don't want the bells to ring in the church.
But don't you think that's part of a wider cultural problem, which is the kind of denigration of the old, the traditional, the values of those before, where people increasingly are rejecting them for a much more fashionable or trendy way of looking at things? I wonder if that is just a specific thing to people moving into those areas, or it's actually part of a wider cultural problem that we're facing.
Well, it's also progress, isn't it? And what you don't want is, I mean, the alternative to this is we all live in our silos, and you can walk around parts of the big cities of Britain, and you will find these atomised dwelling spaces, denuded of things like old people, children. And it's almost like a sort of students' union campus, but on an industrial scale. And you don't want to warehouse your old people here at the coast, in rural villages, and your young people living in cities. We don't want that either, do we? Because that's not a recipe for social cohesion, is it?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think part of the thing that we've been seeing for the last decade or so is this kind of flaring up of generational conflict. And I think that we need much more intergenerational engagement and communication, building that kind of social solidarity of passing knowledge from one generation to the other.
Well, moving on,